On that point, do you remind me just making a little point of that, Tony, on the point of leaving your children?
Mm-hmm.
I've admitted this before, and I'll admit, I don't mind admitting because it's a fact. When my kids were young, possibly the same age as Madeleine McCann, I had 3 boys, and we had a mobile holiday home in a place called British Bay in Dublin, just outside Dublin in Wicklow. It was a very nice area, this place where we were. It was called McDaniel's, and we had a lot of friends who had these. They were very big mobile. They were sort of, what they're like. You don't pull them behind a car, mobile homes. And it was a very well-known place, and we all had these mobile homes. And in the middle of this huge field, there was tennis courts and barbecues areas. And we'd put the kids to bed, and then we'd walk down to the middle of the field, and we'd have a barbecue. And now and again, my wife would go up, or I would go up, and check the children were okay. Now, anyone could have gone in. I don't think I was in any greater distance than the distance they were having their barbecue. Right. And one never thinks of some man going into the caravan and removing my children.
Well, can I ask you, what was your caravan or mobile home within sight of where you were?
It was, yeah. And from what I understand, it was in sight where they were eating in the restaurant, no?
Well, I think that's a common misunderstanding. Very much not. The actual distance as the crow flies was around 60 yards, 60 metres, something like that. The actual walking distance was 120 yards, but the actual room where the children were was on the other side of the apartment where they could not be seen. So I think that's one difference from your account. But the other point is this: you said that you were checking from time to time on the children.
Absolutely,
which is right. You would do that.
Yeah,
you would have done that. Any responsible parent would have done. But how are we to account for Madeleine crying for 75 minutes continually? Now, that wouldn't have happened on your example on the camping site in Ireland.
No, it wouldn't have. Let me ask you about the person who heard her crying for 75 minutes. What do we know about that person?
Her name is Mrs. Pamela Fenn. Mm-hmm. She was a permanent resident in Praia de Luz. She occupied the apartment immediately above. She's a widow, aged 82, and it's also been reported that it's in her statement that she made to the Portuguese police, which has been released, of course. It's one of the reasons we can write the books like this, because the Portuguese police have released a lot of information. She had been discussing this with other friends who apparently were not surprised that they'd heard the children crying, because they'd heard the children crying on a previous night as well. So
it doesn't seem to be a very responsible act on behalf of the parents. I have personally, I'm going to tell you personally, and Mary, who just phoned now, doesn't agree with me at all. I'm sure of that. But I don't see now. My mind has changed, and of course the world has changed a lot since my kids were young. And there's more mad people out there, etc., etc. But I still could not condemn the McCanns for going to the restaurant and I'm sure a lot of people were in that restaurant, have very young kids who were in bed that night. I can't condemn them for that. But it seems to me to be odd. If there was a person, especially a woman of that age who's, more mature and more responsible, hearing a child, a very young child, crying, and one would imagine quite frantically, for 1 hour, one would imagine she would at least go downstairs and see if that child was okay.
Now, you're taxing my memory of the facts in this case, and I'm pretty certain that at some stage she reported her concern to Mark Warner's possibly the following morning. I don't think it was that night, but with hindsight, I would certainly agree with you on that point, that if she heard that for 75 minutes, one would think that she might have done something about it. I mean, I wouldn't like to listen to that for more than 5 or 10 minutes without doing something. So
and a woman of her age is normally, people of that age are younger people. I should leave them alone; they're fine. But woman of that age is quite curious. If I was sitting in my garden, and my neighbours had a child in her garden who was crying, distressed, for over 1 hour, I would go next door and ring the bell and say, "Is the child okay?" And this confuses me slightly. And the fact that the child could have slipped and banged its head and died, and 2 parents who come back who probably and surely adore their children, then discuss of dumping a body, it does make me worry.
Well, as I say, I can't comment further on Mrs. Fenn's reasons for not reporting.
Well, she is the key to this whole thing.
Well, she's not the key. I mean, what she does is she tells us that the children were unattended for at least 75 minutes.
And what did the McCanns say about checking the children?
Well, I don't think we've had I mean, they admit to having left those children several nights in a row.
Yes, I understand that.
That's
right.
on the record.
Yeah.
As to the checking of the children, they have made different claims. In the early days, we heard that they were checking every 15 minutes, sometimes every 30 minutes.
Mm-hmm.
Then we were told every hour. We had all these different versions. All I would say is that, let me take you to the evidence of the waiters at the tapas bar.
Okay.
There are statements from the waiters at the tapas bar where they went every night, and those waiters have said on the record that they never saw the McCanns and their friends checking on their children at all. So I take that into account. The McCanns claimed that they were checking on their children.
How many people were in the tapas bar, do we know?
No, I can't tell beyond that. There were certainly some other families.
I would say it's probably packed because it's the middle of the tourist season, yeah?
Yes.
I don't think a waiter would remember if Mrs. McCann got up or someone went up. They could have been gone to the toilet. How many times did Mrs. McCann go to the toilet, I'd ask the waiter. Yeah, I think that's an incredible thing, that statement, I would say. I mean, how many times were you sitting in a restaurant? Would you? I ran restaurants for 25 years and clubs. I would never know how many times a woman went to a toilet from a certain table. Never mind going and checking on children. You know, I just think that's very weak.
Well, as I say, arguably they were checking their children.
Okay, let's say they were.
Yeah.
As I would do. And possibly other parents, you know. Have you got children?
I've got 2 children and 1 grandchild, yeah.
Okay, well, I've got, 3 children and 2 grandchildren, and 1 on the way even. But I'm just thinking, myself, you go to this holiday resort, which is like a little white village, if you want. It's not a village, it's, apartment blocks. And it's got a swimming pool in the middle, and it's got a restaurant with people, tapas bar restaurant, where people sit and drink, and you normally can see the apartments. The same here in Spain, you can see all the apartments around, and you go and sit. It's like if you had a big garden, would you have your barbecue at the bottom of the garden? If you had your barbecue at the bottom of the garden, and your child, and you go up and you keep looking at your children, and someone slipped in and took your child, would you be then be told that you were neglecting your child? I mean, in Tenerife, there's a missing child. A grandmother was inside doing there's a big case at the moment, and she's inside doing the housework. Her grandson was playing in the garden, and when she came out to get him, the grandchild was gone, abducted.
Yes,
so,
no, I understand all of what you're saying there. I would like to just briefly mention that the NSPCC have got specific guidelines on the leaving of young children, and they do say in their own website, in their own guidance, that you should never leave young children on their own, even for a few minutes. Now, I think the situation you mentioned on your holiday in the mobile phone is somewhat different in that you were within vision of that caravan, and it was perhaps a space where you would notice a stranger and so on. But these doctors they claim to be checking every half an hour. It's a long time to leave a child 130 yards away in a room where you can't see them.
Do you know what the funny thing is? You don't imagine the reason that I think parents are checking on their children to make sure that they're not waking up and not frightened. And the last thing you ever think of is that your child could die. It just is beyond reason. And of course, since the Madeleine McCann case, one thing that we've all learned from this is do not leave our children for 1 minute. And if we are going to go out, go and get a babysitter. That's what we've learned from this lesson.
Well, I'm glad you said that is the lesson that's been learned. It's not a lesson that the McCanns have invited us to adopt, though. What they've been proclaiming is the need for all these kind of amber alerts and these alert systems to abductions and so on. But I would be glad if people do take from this terrible situation that's happened to Madeleine that the message is don't leave your children on their own. The McCanns claimed, if you remember, that what they were doing, what they'd done was well within the bounds of responsible parenting. That was a quote from them.
Tell me.
And they've never, ever, as far as I'm aware on the record, said, look, please, parents, don't leave your children on their own like we did.